Welcome to Professor Pincushion. In this tutorial, we're going to be taking on Simplicity Pattern 1777. This is the 1940s retro dress. We have two versions here, A and B. In this tutorial, we're going to be doing view A. The difference between these two views is in B, it actually has a V-neck, where in A, it goes up to the neckline, and then it has the buttons down the center. So let's take a look at the dress that we're going to be working on today. Here's the dress that we're going to be working on in this tutorial. You can see that it has a high neck collar with buttons that go down the front for a decorative look, and it also has lots of pleats in the front, so it's a really cute design. So let's take a look at the back of the pattern to see what we're going to need in order to make it. Flip your pattern envelope to the back, and you're going to see everything that you're going to need to know on what you're going to need to get in order to complete this project. So the very first thing we're going to see is fabrics. So this is what they recommend that you use in order to make this dress. This is their recommendation. Now, if you find something that you like and it doesn't fall on this list, but it has a similar texture and weight, you can get away and use that type of fabric. This is just some of the examples that they give that'll make this dress really work well. Next, we're going to have notions. So these are additional items that we're going to need in addition to fabric. So for notions, we need matching thread. You can just usually get away using all-purpose thread for this. You need one 22-inch zipper, a hook and eye, and then if you're doing view A, which is the one we're doing, we're also going to need 6 buttons, and they give you the size of the buttons right here. Next, you're going to have body measurements. So depending on what your body measurement is going to make a determination on what size you're going to use. So the pattern size is down here. So all you have to do is match up the column of your size, go down, and then you'll find what the pattern size is. Now these are different than what your retail size is. That's why it's very important, if you've never done this before, to actually look at the measurements, take your measurements, and then find the one that best suits you. If you need help on taking your measurements, visit our other tutorial on how to take your body measurements on our website. So once you know what pattern size is, everything below that column is going to pertain to you. So if I'm doing a size 14, everything below size 14, these yards, that's going to be for size 14. So if I'm doing dress A, all I have to do is find the width of my fabric, go over to the size 14 right underneath it, and that's going to tell me how many yards I'm going to need. Now you'll see the difference is 45 and 60. This is the width of the fabric, so you need to look at the fabric bowl and it will tell you what the width of the fabric is. So for example, I'm using 60-inch width fabric. I'm going to go till I get to right underneath 14, and it says I'm going to need 2 1/4 yards of fabric in order to complete this dress. Underneath it, you'll see dress B. So if you want to do a dress B, it's the same exact thing. They have that contrasting bodice front, so you would need additional fabric for that. And then you'll see underneath here, even though it's under the dress B category, for A and B, so it doesn't matter what dress you're doing, you're still going to need some lining. So you're going to need 3/4 yard of 45-inch lining. And then we're also going to need interfacing, so 7/8 yard of lightweight fusible interfacing. So even though I'm doing A, I'm still going to need these 2 additional things, so make sure that you get that. So once you have all your fabric, we can then look at the inside of the envelope, at the directions, and see what patterns we're going to need to cut out. At the top of page 1 in our directions, you're going to see something that looks like this. So over here we have the pictures of the different views, view A and view B. And then over here is a diagram of all the pattern pieces that are included. So in this, we only have 8 pieces. Underneath here, you'll see the names, the numbers, and these numbers correspond to the numbers that are listed on the pieces here. So number 1 goes with number 1. That's the bodice front A. The letters behind the names correspond to the views over here. So number 1, bodice front A, means that if I'm doing view A, I need to cut out this bodice front. Now what I noticed is that we have bodice front here for number 1 and bodice front AB number 8 right here. These are actually, they're both the bodice front, but this one here is the V-neck and this one here, number 1, is the higher collar. So number 8 is actually just for B if you want to do the V-neck. So if I'm doing view A, I'm going to cut out 1 through 7, and if I'm doing view B, I'm going to cut out 2 through 8. Now you'll notice 5, the sleeve right here. View B has 3/4 length sleeves, and then view A has the full length sleeve. So this goes down to your wrist. If you want to actually do the 3/4 length sleeve, even if you're doing view A, which is what I'm doing, is perfectly acceptable. There'll actually be a line because you're cutting out, 5 is for both of them, but as you're cutting it out, you'll see a line that goes across that says cut for view B, which will be the shorter sleeve length. So if you want to actually have the shorter sleeve length, even if you're doing A, then you just go ahead and cut across that line. So that's all for cutting out your pieces. I'm actually going to show you one of the pattern pieces so we can talk about cutting it out next. When you pull out your tissue paper, you're going to see patterns that are printed on it. And on each pattern, there'll be the number. And again, this number corresponds to the one that's on that chart on the front page. It has the name of the pattern, so bodice front, and then it tells you again what view it's for. So in this case, number 8, again, it's for B. So I don't really need to cut this one out since I'm doing A, but I just wanted to show it as an example. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out this pattern if it was for mine. And you're going to see that there's going to be lines here with a series of numbers. So if I'm doing size 14, I would only have to cut on the line that has the 14, and all these other ones would be cut out. If I'm doing size 20, then I would cut up here on the 20 line. So for the 14, I would cut along here. If you have any notches, you're going to cut them out or make some sort of indication that there's a notch here, because that's for when we're placing pieces together. You'll see I did one right here. Go along the 14 line, come down here. Here's another notch, so I'd cut out here. And then once it's just one solid line, there's no numbers to it, that means it's for all sizes. You also want to take a look at your pattern because it's going to have valuable information. It's going to tell you here like how much you need to cut out of your fabric. So you need to cut 1 out on the fold of your fabric, you need to cut 1 out of your interfacing, and then you need to also cut 1 out for the lining. So you'll see actually on the pattern piece what you need to cut out for it. Also here you'll see there'll be arrows that this is being placed in the fold, and then you'll see some dots. So these marks need to be transferred to your fabric, and we'll get a little bit more in there once we get to after you cut out your fabric pieces. But now let's first look at our layout directions. At the bottom of page 1, you're going to see a diagram listing the pattern layout. So this is how they recommend that you lay out your pattern pieces so you're actually able to get everything cut out in the fabric yardage that they gave you. Now just to point out a couple of things, up here you're going to see this helpful hint. So if it's shaded, that means that the pattern is upside down. So the printed side of the pattern is facing down towards the fabric. If it's white, that means the print side of the pattern is facing up towards you. So that just makes it a little bit easier when reading this. Now this is for dress A, which is the one I'm doing. And underneath it tells you all the pattern pieces that you need in order for this layout. So it's saying 1 through 7, which is what we already knew. You'll see 1 here and 1 here, 1A, 1B. This one here is for 44 or 45 inch width fabric. This one is for 58 and 60 inch width fabric. So since I have 60 inch width fabric, I'm going to be following this setup here. Now you'll notice it's in 2 parts. So even though I got one long piece of 2 1/4, they actually split it up so they're able to get everything fitted on here. So what they do is you can lay out piece number 6 and then just cut off your fabric. So then you're going to be taking it, open it up, and then on each side you're going to fold a little bit over here, and then you're going to fold the majority over here. So you're going to have a fold on this side and a fold on this side. This is because number 6 and number 1, they both need to be placed on the fold of the fabric when you cut it out. So then when you open it up, you have one big piece of number 6 instead of 2 pieces. Like number 4 does not. So when I cut it out, I actually get 2 pieces of number 4 out of my fabric because it's folded in here. So I place number 6 on the fold, and then up here it's face down backwards, and then I do number 1 on the fold, and I can also squeeze number 4 on there so I can get that cut out. Then I'm going to take the remaining of my fabric And you're able to cut out, you'll see one side has the fold, and I'm able to cut out my other 4 pieces that I need. Now we're not quite done cutting everything out. If I scoot this over, you're going to see up here a lining. So I only need to cut out piece number 1 out of my lining, and again it's placed on the fold. And then over here is my interfacing. So out of my interfacing, I need to cut out 1 and 4. Number 1 needs to be placed in the fold, number 4 doesn't. So I should get 2 pieces of number 4 out of the interfacing. So once you get everything cut out of your fabric, your lining, your interfacing, then we can go about placing our marks on our fabric. After you cut out your fabric pieces, you're definitely going to want to transfer any marks that you have onto the pieces. So to do that, what I like to do is I'll grab a straight pin here. I'll put it through the mark that I need to transfer. And then I'll just use either a pencil or a fabric marker, and I'll just mark. You'll see I did my marks here. Now you'll notice also there's one right here. It's right on that fold line there, so don't forget to do that. Some of them are a little hidden just like that one. And I usually like to do them to the wrong side of my fabric. Now if you look at your pattern pieces, for example number 6, you'll see some dotted lines at the top, and it's for making the pleats, or maybe you have one set of lines that says a stitching line. Definitely want to transfer those as well, because it's going to come in handy later for when we're making the pleats or we need to stitch in a particular area. And for that, I like to do it on the right side of the fabric. Also, after I cut out my pieces, I like to keep my pattern piece pinned to those pieces. That way I don't have to remember which piece is what. I just keep everything pinned together until I use it, and it just helps in keeping things organized. So once you have all your marks done, we can go ahead, go back to our pattern directions so we can start assembling our dress. All right, open it up to the top of page 2, and you're going to see our directions for our dress. So we have the written directions on the right hand side and the picture directions on the left hand side. You'll see a number and a number. So number 1 for the picture corresponds to number 1 of the written directions. Up here we have the fabric key guide. So if it's shaded, that means you're looking at the right side of the fabric. White means it's the wrong side of the fabric. If it's white with these little symbols, that's for the interfacing. And then polka dot means that you're looking at the lining. So once you know this, it makes it a little bit easier for figuring out what's going on in the pictures. At the top of our directions, you'll see dress A, B. So this means that generally it's going to be the same directions for both of these. If it doesn't specify, that means it's for both views. Now if it varies, like if it's for view B, it'll actually say for view B do such and such. So we're just going to be reading the written directions on the right hand side, and then we're going to be demonstrating what you're going to need to do. So if it's for view B, we're going to kind of skip over that, and we're just going to be going with the view A directions. Let's do the first part of step number 1. Stay stitch front and back neck edges 1/2 inch from cut edge in direction of arrows. So we'll tackle the second part of step 1 after this, but let's just do the stay stitching. So what you're going to need is pieces number 1 if you're doing dress A, or number 8 if you're doing dress B, and then you have 2 of a number 3. This is the back bodice here. So what they want you to do is you're not stitching any pieces together. You're just doing one single layer, and you're just stitching this neck area here and then the neck area of the back piece. So this large one, this is the armhole, here's the shoulder, and then this is the neckline, and this is the center back seam of the back. So it's just this little curve right up here. So when you're doing your stay stitch, it is helping to prevent the neck area from getting all stretched out and distorted when you're working with it. So it's just something that we do as a precaution. So you're going to want to backstitch, and for this you're going to be doing it for both of your back pieces in the neck area. You're going to be stitching from up here to up here. Now I just normally just use a basting stitch, but I make sure that I backstitch on both sides. The same thing over here. You're going to be stitching this area here, and you can start at one end and go to the other end. Don't forget to backstitch. Or if you have a problem with puckering, what you can do is start here, sew here, and then start here, and then meet in the middle. So don't forget to backstitch for that as well. So we're going to go ahead and go to the machine and do that, and then we'll tackle the second part of step 1. Alright, so I'm doing my stay stitch on my neckline, and I normally like to do it about a 1/2 inch from the raw edge of this curve here. You can do it you can do it closer, you can do it at the seam line, which would be 5/8 of an inch. If you look at the general directions at the front page on page 1, you'll notice that it gives the standard seam allowance. In this particular case for this pattern, it's 5/8 of an inch. So whenever they say seam lines, seam allowance, do a seam, they always mean 5/8 of an inch unless otherwise stated. So I'm just getting to the end here and I'm going to do a back stitch and then we can move on to the next part. Alright, so let's look at the next part. To reinforce large dots and small dot, at center front, stitch along seam line for 1 inch on both sides of dots. Clip seam allowance to dots, being careful not to clip through stitching. So this is going to be at the very bottom of your bodice front. So again, that's number 1 if you're doing A or number 8 if you're doing B. So I put pins where my dots are. You should have 2 large ones here and then you have a small one here in the middle. I just put pins because mine are a little hard to see on this fabric. So what you're going to do is you're going to start 1 inch above one of your dots here on the side. So about right there. Don't forget to backstitch. You're just doing a regular width stitch and you're doing it at your seam allowance line. So that's going to be 5/8 of an inch in from your raw edge here. Now you're going to stitch, don't forget to backstitch, down to the dot. You're going to go across to the center dot and then you're going to go up to this dot and then go up 1 inch and then backstitch again. So that is going to reinforce this area. And again, you're not sewing anything together, you're just keeping it flat. It's one single layer. And then what we're going to do is we're going to clip in little notches here at the dot areas, but I'll show you what that looks like after. Alright, I already stitched along my seam line down here at the bottom and you can see I clipped in these little notches. So I'm just doing it where my marks are, the 3 marks that I did, and it's right on those corners. I'm cutting those corners off and I'm cutting really close to my seam line, but be careful not to cut your stitches because we don't want those coming out. You're just cutting right up to them. So that's all you need to do in order to finish step 1. Step 2, to make pleats on bodice side front and outside, fold along solid line. Bring folds to broken lines, pin, baste across raw edges. So for this one, we're going to be working with piece number 2. So this is the bodice side front, and you should have 2 of these cut out of your fabric. I'm going to be demonstrating on what to do on the pattern piece because it's a lot easier to see the lines than to see it on my fabric. So all you're going to be doing is over here you have all these lines for making the pleat, and this should have been transferred to your fabric. You have solid ones and you have dotted ones. So you're going to fold on the right, having the right side of the fabric up, fold on the solid line, bring it to the pleated line that's above it. And you can see that it has arrows showing you in which direction you go. I'm just going to pin the fold in place. If I can get it through there, there we go. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this one and the same thing for this one. So these are all going to be pinned down. And it doesn't matter what it's doing over here. Obviously, it's a little bit different for paper than for fabric. Okay. And then we're going to pin that. Okay, so now that they're all pinned, all you're going to do is take it to your machine and you're going to baste across the fold. So it's going to hold it there. Now you could probably just do it like a 1/2 inch away from the raw edge. So go ahead and baste it. You're not doing any back stitching. It's the biggest machine or stitch that you have on your machine. You're just stitching from here to here, right along those folded edges to hold them. And it's just a temporary stitch just to hold it so we can do the next part. Alright, so I'm just basting across my pleats and you can see there's one right here. And I'm not doing any sort of back stitching. And I'm just going to do it until I get them all tacked down. Step 3. To gather side front edge between lower notch and small dot, stitch along seam line and 1/4 inch inside seam line using a long machine stitch. So we're working with the same piece that we just did our pleats on. So this is piece number 2. And you'll notice on the same side of your pleats, above your pleat, so here's my pleat up here, there'll be a notch. So you're going to come in to your seam line, which is 5/8 of an inch because that's our seam allowance, and you're going to do a basting stitch. So that's the longest stitch in your machine, no back stitching. You're going to start here at the notch, at your seam line 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge, and you're going to stitch down again past your pleats to where you have your marking dot at the bottom. I marked mine with this yellow pin so it's easier to see. So this is right below your last pleat on your pattern. You should see a small dot. So you're going to stitch that length with a basting stitch, and then you're going to start again at the notch from the stitch you just made. You're going to go over 1/4 of an inch, and then you're going to stitch another basting stitch, no back stitch, long stitch to your dot again. So you're going to do that for both pieces because we're going to use these stitches to pull them and to gather this area. Step 4. On skirt front, to reinforce large dots and small dot at center of front, stitch along seam line for 1 inch on both sides of dot. Clip seam allowance to dots, being careful not to clip through stitching. So now we're going to be working with pattern piece number 6. And this side right here should have been placed in the fold, so when you unfold it, you have one long piece here. Now you'll notice at the top of the pattern, we have pleat lines again that need to be transferred to our fabric piece on the right side. And then we also have dots. You have one right here on the side, you have a large one here, and a small one up here. The ones we're going to be working with on this step is just the large dot here and the small dot in the center. So because it's folded in half, you're going to have 2 large dots, one on each side, and then you're going to have this one in the middle here. So let me remove this pattern so we can see my fabric. And I marked the 2 large dots, one on this side, one on this side, and the one in the middle with pins. I know it's really hard to see. So just like we did before with the bodice front, on either side of each of these dots, you're going to start stitching 1 inch away. And you're just going to follow along with the zigzag, making sure that you're doing it 5/8 of an inch away from the raw edge. So for example, for this one, I'm starting 1 inch away, using a regular stitch and doing a back stitch, following along with the zigzag 5/8 of an inch away from the raw edge. So I'm stitching here, coming to the dot, pivoting, and then stitching up here for about 1 inch, and then back stitching. Do the same thing for each of these dots, and then just like before, right where you have the dots, you're going to clip a little inward notch, being sure not to clip your stitches. So I do it here, here, and here. And once that's done, we can move on to step number 5. Step 5, to make pleats on skirt front, on outside, fold along solid lines, bring folds to broken lines, pin, baste across raw edge. So we've already done this before in our bodice. You're just doing the same thing, except you're doing it for the skirt. You're folding along your solid lines, and then you just bring them to the broken lines that are right next to it. Go ahead and pin it. You're going to do it for all of it, and then you're just going to baste across all of them to hold them in place. Now, of course, this is only half of it, so it's going to be this and then the other side as well, and that's all you have to do. So I'm going to go ahead and do it on my real fabric, and then we'll move on to the next step. Step 6, with right sides together, pin bodice side front to skirt at waistline seam. Stitch, press seam toward bodice. So now we're going to have our side front bodice pieces. This is piece number 2 that has the basting stitches here. So the right side up and the basting are facing each other. Then we have our skirt front. So this is where we just baste it, and with everything folded together, it kind of looks like a mess. But what we're going to be working with is the top of the skirt that has the single notch here. I have one here, and then I have one here. This is going to match the single notch at the bottom of our side front bodice piece here and here. So now that these are lined up, all I'm going to do is place the bodice right side together with the skirt. So I'm just going to flip it. So now I'm matching the single notch, the edge here, and then the edge over here. So I'm going to pin all this, and I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Flip this, line this up, pin it, and then you're going to take it to your machine and you're going to do a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So after you stitch it, you can go ahead and pull this up again, and you're just going to take it to your iron and press it so all your seam allowance is pressing up towards your bodice. When I do a standard seam, I'm just using a regular width stitch, and I'm making sure to do a back stitch on both sides. So I have just going along the area that I pinned, attaching the side front bodice to the skirt front, doing it at the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Step 7, apply fusible interfacing to wrong side of bodice front following manufacturer's directions. So what you're going to do is now you're going to take your bodice front piece, and you should have one cut out of the interfacing as well, because we're going to apply our interfacing to our bodice front. Now I usually cut my interfacing a little bit smaller than the piece, so that's why you can see both pieces. The side where you feel the glue bubbles, you feel little bumps, that goes to the wrong side of the bodice front. I already have my iron heating up. Going to get my pressing cloth here and carefully lay it over. I'm just going to do one piece at a time because I can't fit the whole thing. And I'm going to dampen it. And then I'm going to take my iron and I'm going to press it down in one spot and leave it there for a few seconds, about maybe 4 or 5 seconds. And carefully lift it up, move it over to your next spot. So you're not shifting it, you're just carefully lifting it up and then putting it over. And then you can always check to see if you need to reapply it. So right there, I could probably put some more heat right there so I could redo that. So I'm going to go ahead and finish doing the whole thing, and then we'll do the second part of step 7. All right, so let's move on with step 7. With right sides together, pin bodice front to side, front and skirt, matching notches, small and large dots, and having raw edges even. Pull up gathering stitches to fit. Base, stitch, pivoting with needle and fabric at large and small dots. Press seam towards front. So this is what we have so far. Here is the side front. It's already been attached to the skirt front. Here's our seam right here. So now we're going to get our bodice front. This is our piece that we just put our fusible interfacing in. And you got to imagine that when it is attached, it's going to be right in the middle, just like this. So bodice front, and then the side fronts are on the side. So the next step is attaching this to this whole section right here. So to do that, we need to pin the right sides together. So I lay it out like this, right side up, so I know what it's supposed to look like. So it's a little less tricky when I need to pin them together. So this side needs to go with this side. So I'm just starting at one side at a time, so it gets a little less confusing. So I flipped it so the right sides are together. I'm going to make sure that the raw edges are even and it's lined up at the top, and we have notches here on the side, and all those notches are matching. So let's grab my pins here, start pinning this. Now I have a notch here on my side front, a notch here on my bodice. I'm going to make sure that these are lined up, and I'm going to go ahead and pin it. And you'll notice the side front kind of curves, so you're going to have to put quite a few pins in order to fit it with the bodice front. So that's perfectly normal and fine. Then I have another notch down here and another notch here. Make sure those line up. And again, putting a lot of pins so that curve fits right in there. Now, before you get to, like here I have a large dot. It's kind of hard to see, but I have a small dot right above that in my bodice here. That small dot should line up with your seam line of the side front and the skirt front. So it's right here in the seam line. So I'm going to pin that. And you'll notice that when you pin it, the whole pleating section of your side front, it's going to be larger than this area that I've pinned. So you're going to have to pull, let me undo this, you're going to have to pull your gathering stitches in order to ease this area so it fits in between this notch here and where the small dot is on your front. So it's just like putting in a sleeve. You just kind of gather it, distribute it evenly so we don't have any huge major wrinkles. And then it'll slowly start easing in, and then you can go ahead and pin it. It is going to be gathered, so expect that. So once I have this side done, now what you can do if you want to make it a little bit easier, see how that's now all pinned there? I can go ahead and do the same thing on this side. So this is going to get flipped this way, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. Now here at the bottom, we're going to have to fit this bottom point now with the top of the skirt. So I have here a large dot on my front. That's going to match up with my large dot. Let me just pull this up a little bit. My large dot right here where my pleating is. So You may have to search for that in your gathering. So mine's about right there. Let me just move this up over here. And then my small dot here at the center is going to match my center small dot here in my skirt. So that's going to go like that. So the dots should match. So your raw edge of the bottom of your bodice is not going to match up all these, almost basting stitch, all this folded part that I have up here. So it should just be lined up about right about there. So I'm just going to do that, and then I'm just going to flip it and do this side. So if you haven't done this side yet, you're just going to keep turning it until it's all pinned there. So once it's all pinned, then what you're going to do is you're going to baste it all the way around. So we're going to attach the two pieces. So it's just going to hold it, so then you can take out the pins and you can go ahead, stitch over your basting stitch. Now when they're saying pivoting at the dots, they're talking about the dots that are down here because they want it to be a nice clean point area. So what they're saying is when you get down here to your first large dot, you're going to stitch down to the dot, you're going to leave your needle in, lift your foot, and just pivot your fabric so you can turn it. And then you're going to do the same thing here and the same thing here. So you get a nice clean point as you're stitching it. So that's all they're saying there. So after you stitch it, you can go ahead and make sure that all your seam allowance is pressed so that it lies underneath your front bodice, because that's always going to be, it's going to be hidden once we put the lining on the bodice, so that should be fine. So I'm going to go ahead and pin it and then stitch it, and with that we will be done with step 7. So here's the bottom of where my front bodice is attached to the skirt and the side front here. So you can see I have my pivot points here. And you see that the center section where we had the notch because of the small mark lines up where I have the small mark right here on my skirt. So that's how all that works. So now when I want to press it, I'm just going to press everything inwards. Just like that. So it's all behind our front bodice here. Alright, so let's move on to step number 8. To make darts and bodice back with right sides together, fold the fabric through the center of the dart, bringing the broken lines and small dots together. On inside, place pins at right angles to broken lines. Stitch the dart from the wide end to the point. So now we're going to be working on the darts, and this is for piece number 3, which is the bodice back. And we have 2 darts on each one. So you have one here at the shoulder, and then you have one here at the bottom of the bodice. And if you look at your pattern piece, I'm just showing you on the pattern just because it's easier to see the lines than on my fabric. You'll see several lines here and dots and everything like that. You only need to do the one that's for your size, and you can see them down here. So this one's 12 through 14, this one's 16 through 18, and this is 20 through 22. I'm doing size 14, so I'm going to do this dot, and then I got to find the 2 dots here that are my size. And then it has the dotted lines going up to my point here. So you definitely want to do the dots, and you also want to draw the lines on your fabric, and I would do it on the wrong side of your fabric. You're going to do the same thing up here. So I would do 14, and then I would draw the lines to my 14. So in order to make the darts, again, you're going to have it wrong side facing up of your fabric. It's usually easier to start at the point. So I'm going to fold the circle that's at the end, this dot, in half. Grab my straight pins here. And it's definitely easier to do in fabric than it is in paper. And I always place my pins so it's going perpendicular to the fold of the dart here. So then I'm going to fold this end in half so that the 2 dots, 12 and 14, meet on each side. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm going to put my pin through this dot, the 12 to 14 dot, check the other side and see if it goes through. That looks pretty good. And again, place the pin in perpendicular. And then I just pin the rest of it. And I always like to check both sides. So I put it through one line, and then I check to make sure I went through the line. And if it's good, then I can place the pin. All right, just about there. And you just keep doing it until you make it all the way to your end point there. So once you have it all pinned up, you're going to take it to your machine and you're going to stitch right along your line that you marked on your fabric. So you're going to back stitch here, you're going to do a regular stitch, go along your line, and then you're just going to run it right off. You run your machine right off the fabric, so you're not doing a back stitch, just sew right off of it. And you're going to be doing the same thing for this one up here. So again, there's 2 for number 3. And let me show you one I've done. So here's one dart up here, one dart down here. So I did my back stitch here. I can go ahead and trim this off. Because we don't have any back stitch done here, they want you to try to prevent the bubble at the end. So in order to prevent it, you're going to tie a hand knot. So all I'm going to do is just grab the threads, make sure you leave it long, create a loop, bring the end through the loop, and then pull it. Try to get the knot as close as you can to your fabric. There you go. And then you can just cut that off. So you would do that for all your darts. And then I usually like to press my darts towards the center. So the straight edge is the center back, so I press them in this direction. You can see here's the armhole, so that's the side. So you need to do this both for the 2 back pieces and then the 2 skirt back pieces, which I believe is piece number 7. So there's a dart at the top of that, and you're just going to do the same for all of those pieces. Step 9. With right sides together, pin bodice to skirt at waistline seam. Stitch press seam toward bodice. So you're going to take one of your back bodice pieces and one of your back skirt pieces, and we're going to attach them here right at the waistline. So that's going to be the area where you have your dart. And you'll notice also there'll be a notch right here at the top of the skirt and a notch right here at the bottom of the bodice. So these should line up. Once you have the right ones together, you're just going to take it, place it right side together, like that, and then you're going to pin and stitch your 5/8 inch seam allowance. So you're going to make sure that the edges match, the notch matches, the dart matches, and then go ahead and stitch it, and you're going to press the seam allowance up towards the bodice. And I already have one done, so let me show you that one. So here's the right side, and then let me flip it over, the wrong side. And you can see the seam allowance is pressed up this way towards the bodice. So that's all you need to do in order to complete the step. Step 10, with right sides together, pin front to back at shoulder and side seams, matching seams having raw edges even. So now you're going to take your front dress, so this is the front bodice, side front, and then the front skirt, all stitched together. We have all our nice little pleats showing. Right side is facing up. I'm going to take one of my back pieces now, because now we're going to attach the front to the back. I'm going to lay it on top of my front here on the side, right sides together, and you know you're doing the right one because we want to make sure that the armhole, which is this curve up here, is going in the same direction. So if you lay your back on and you have your armhole on the side, that means you did the right one. Otherwise, you need to get the other back. So you're going to lay one on this side, and then you're going to lay one over there on that side as well. So the back is then going to be attached to the front. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to line up right up here my shoulder. You're going to do a 5/8 inch seam allowance here at the shoulder. Just pin that, making sure that my edges match and the raw edges are even. All right, we're going to skip the armhole. Now we're just going to do the side seam. So right at the edge of this armhole here, I'm going to again pin it. You see I have a notch here, so I'm going to make sure that notch matches up. And I'm going to pin it all the way down to the bottom hemline of my dress. And also make sure that your waistline matches up as well. So after you pin it, you're going to do your 5/8 inch seam allowance here. You're going to do it for the other side, and then it's a good idea to press your seams open when you're done. Step 11. Apply fusible interfacing to wrong side of back facing sections. With right sides together, stitch shoulder seam of facing and front lining sections together. So the first part is you need to apply your fusible interfacing to your back facing pieces. There should be 2 of the number 4 pieces. And I've already put my fusible interface to it. It's just like we did before. Then you're going to bring in your lining piece of your number 1 front face or front bodice section. So this is now going to be the facing, so the front facing. I have the right side facing up. I'm going to take now my back facing with the fusible interfacing and I'm going to place it right side together so the notches match. So there's going to be one on this side and there's going to be one over here on this side. So you're just going to try to fit this as best you can. And then you're going to go ahead and stitch your 5/8 inch seam allowance and you're going to press your seam open. The second part of step 11 says to edge finish unnotched edge, stitch 1/4 inch from edge, turn under along stitching and stitch, or zigzag over the edge or overlock serge over the edge. So basically we're going to do an edge finish and you're going to do it right along this area here. So this area here, you don't have to do anything. This is all fine and raw edge. This is where you do the edge finish. So the first thing you do is just stitch a regular width stitch 1/4 of an inch from the raw edge. You can see my stitching line already here. So I already did that all the way around. Then what you're going to do is you're going to fold along the same edge so that your stitching line is right on the fold. And they also said that you can just zigzag along the edge if you want as well, if you're worrying about fraying and stuff. So I'm just going to pin this all the way around. And once it's pinned, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to stitch again right along the whole thing after it's all folded up. And that's going to keep it turned over to the wrong side of our facing. Alright, so at this point I'm just stitching down my edge finish. So you can see it's folded over and I have my original stitch right on that fold line. So I'm just stitching right close to the fold. Don't forget to back stitch and you're just using a regular width stitch. Step 12. With right sides together, pin lining and facing to neck edge, matching centers and seams, having raw edges even, stitch neck edge, trim seam, clip curves. So again, now we're going to be working with our dress. This is the front right side facing up. So this is the front bodice neckline right here. This is the back, and this is the top of the back here. You should have a notch on each side. I just pulled it up so we can see the whole neckline, the front and the back. You're then going to grab your lining and facing piece. So this is the one we just did the edge finish on. And you're going to place it on top of your dress right sides together. So this edge inside here, that is also the neckline. So all you're going to do is line it up and you'll see we have a notch here and a notch here, and that's going to match up the notches that are in the back. So let me grab my straight pins here and I'm just going to pin it. Once the whole neckline is pinned, you're going to go ahead and you're going to stitch your 5/8 inch seam allowance. I'm also going to make sure that my shoulder seams here and the one here in my dress are also going to match. After you stitch it, you can go ahead and trim your seam allowance. You can trim it to about a quarter, so a 1/4 of an inch is left hanging on it. And then you can clip notches. Because since this is all a curved area, we want it to lie flat once we turn our lining to the inside of the dress. So that'll kind of cut down by trimming and clipping notches on some of the bulk there. But I'll show you what that's going to look like in our next step. So here you can see that I've stitched my neckline and I went ahead and trimmed it, so there's only about a 1/4 of an inch left, and I did my little inverted notches to help with the curved areas. So now let's look at step 13. To understitch, press lining and facing away from neck edge, press seam toward lining and facing side up, stitch close to seam through lining, facing, and seam allowances. So all they want you to do is you're going to take your facing and your lining and you're going to press it up away from the front and back of your dress. So here's my dress on this side, here's my facing and lining up on this side. Now, when you press it, what you want to make sure is all the seam allowance gets pressed underneath your facing and your lining. So that should all be under there, so I can fill it with my finger. That is all there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch on the facing and lining side, so this side over here, not on the side of the dress, and I'm going to stitch as close as I can to that seam line. So I'm stitching through the facing and through my seam allowance. So that's going to tack my seam allowance to underneath my facing and also my lining when I get to that point. So you're just using a regular width stitch. Don't forget to back stitch. I'm going to start at one end, making sure that all my seam allowance is right underneath there. And then I'll just start right here on this end. Do a couple of stitches, a couple of back stitches, and then I'm just being careful not to actually go into the seam, but just right next to it on the side of the facing and the lining. And I'm going to do this all along the whole neckline. Step 14, turn lining and facing to inside and press. So pretty easy step. You just take the lining and the facing, you just understitch, and you're just going to turn it so it's all on the inside of the dress. Because we want it to look nice and neat in the bodice area, so that's why we're doing it, and it creates a nice neckline here on the top. So with the understitching, it should be pretty easy to fold it so that you have your facing and your lining on the inside and the dress on the outside, and then you're just going to press all along the neckline so you have a nice crisp edge up here. Step 15, on inside, pin lining over seam, placing pins on outside, stitch and ditch or groove of front seam, stitching between shoulder seams, catching in lining on inside. So this is actually a two-part thing. Let's just tackle the first part. So in the last step, all we did is turn our lining and our facing to the inside of the dress. So that's what we're looking at now. We're looking at the wrong side of the dress, and my lining is in place. If I lift this up, here's the front bodice, and you can see all the inner facing and all the seams and stuff like that. So with the lining, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be covering up all the seam allowance so it looks a little bit neater on the inside of the dress. So if I was to lay this flat, what should happen is the edge of your lining should overhang a little bit past the edge of your seam here where you have your actual stitching. That is perfect. We definitely want that, because once this is actually attached to the dress, we're not going to see it. We're not going to see any stitches, and we're not going to see any of this ugly seam allowance. So all you're going to do at this point is, and you're just doing this for the lining piece. You don't have to worry about doing it for the facing. You're going to grab your straight pins and make sure that this is all nice and smooth and everything is placed where it needs to. And you're just going to pin all along the perimeter of your lining so it's attached to your dress. Then we're going to flip it over. We're going to look at the right side of the dress, and you can kind of see where your pins are, and you're just going to grab another set of pins and you're going to pin on the outside of the dress, because that's what we're going to be looking at when we're actually sewing it. So the pins on the inside are eventually going to be removed. We're just doing it so we are able to see them on the right side, and then we can repin it so we can go ahead and stitch it down. But I'm just going to take care of the first part right now. I'm going to go ahead and pin this, and then we'll flip it over, and then I'll just show it to you. So it'll be really easy for you to understand. After pinning my lining all on the inside of the dress, again, I'm going to flip it so I can see the right side of the dress. And then what I just do is I remove one pin at a time from the back, and then I just put it in the front. So again, I'm pinning through the lining and through my main fabric. So once you have all your pins, so when you finish, this should all be pinned on the right side of the dress, just like you can kind of see my pins here. And you should have no pins on the inside of the dress, because we're going to be looking at the right side as we stitch along the seam line here. So I just want to point out, when we stitch on the ditch, and we'll get closer so you can see what that looks like on the machine, you're going to start at the neckline at the shoulder seam. You're going to stitch along the shoulder seam until you get to the edge of where the seam is between your front bodice and the side front. So you're going to turn a corner about here, and then stitch all along the perimeter of the front bodice until you get to the other side, and then you stitch the shoulder seam on the other side as well. So I'm going to go ahead and finish pinning this on the right side of the dress, and then we'll get a little closer so I can show you what stitching in the ditch looks like. When you need to stitch in the ditch, you need to try and stitch right in that seam line. So you're not really going to see your stitches either on this side or on this side. It's going to be right in the middle. You just got to do the best that you can. So if you need to go slow, definitely go slow. And I'm going to do this all the way around the front bodice, attaching the lining to the bodice and also at the shoulder seams. All right, with step 16, we're going to start getting ready to put in our zipper. So let's prep with step 16. With right sides together, stitch center back seam from lower edge to notch, back stitch at notch to reinforce seam. So the back of the dress is still open. Here's one back, here's the other back. So the part that's open is our center back seam. This is the bottom of the dress, and about partway up the dress, you're going to see a single notch. So we're going to take the two back pieces, you're going to put them right sides together, grab some straight pins here, and you're going to pin so that the bottom of the dress matches, the raw edges are even on the side, and they're going to match here at the notch. And you only need to pin to the notch. So I'm pinning this area to this area. And then we're going to go to our machine and we're going to stitch our 5/8 inch seam allowance between these two areas. So from here to here. Definitely don't forget to back stitch here and at the bottom as well, because above this notch is where we're going to start putting in our zipper. So we need to make sure that the stitching between here, it stays in our dress and does not come undone. So I'm going to go ahead, pin this, stitch it. Don't forget to press your seam allowance open after you stitch it. It's always nice to have it open. And then we're going to move on to step number 17. Step 17, press under 5/8 of an inch on left back opening edge and a 1/2 inch on right back opening edge. Pin right back edge to zipper tape, placing pressed edge close to the zipper teeth, and tab end of zipper 3/8 inch below upper edge of opening. Turn upper edge of zipper tape over seam allowance. Stitch close to pressed edge using an adjustable zipper foot. And there's more, but let's just do the first part. So the first thing is, I'm looking at the back of my dress. So we have one side, this is the left side of the dress, and here's the right side of the back of the dress. So on the left side, they want you to press under, which I've already done, 5/8 of an inch. So that's just your seam allowance. You're just pressing it over. And if you have trouble because of the facing and it's not really lining up with their main part of your dress, you can go ahead and baste the two pieces together. So you're basting the facing and the main part of your dress just on the edge, and it just makes it a little bit easier when you're trying to fold both of them over. So okay, left hand side we fold over 5/8 of an inch. Right hand side you fold over 1/2 an inch. So I go ahead, measure it, pin it, and press it, and I just left my pins in so it stays nice and neat for me. Then you're going to grab your 20-inch zipper. Now the head tab of your zipper should come 3/8 of an inch down from the top of the right hand side of the dress. So the tab doesn't go all the way at the top, it goes 3/8 of an inch. And don't worry, because we're going to be putting a hook and eye up here on the top, so that's going to keep that top part closed. So you'll see it's hanging down about there, and you'll notice that you have your zipper tape sticking up out of your dress. So you don't want to cut that off. We want to have a nice clean edge. So in order to fix that, I'm just going to flip it over to the other side, remove one of my pins. I'm going to tuck it between what I folded over and the main part of the dress. So it's going to be sandwiched in between them. So I'm just going to tuck it in between those two layers of that fold, turn it around, repin it, and then we have a nice clean top. Now this fold of the right hand side should go right along the side of your zipper teeth on the right hand side here. And you're just going to pin it all the way down. So I'm going to do it till I get to the very end of my zipper, and then we're going to take it to our machine and we're going to sew right along that folded edge, getting as close as we can to the teeth. So it's not covering the teeth, it's just right along next to it. So I'm going to go ahead and pin this, and then we'll just get in a little closer so you can see me actually stitch this and what that looks like. When sewing your zipper, you're definitely going to want to use an adjustable zipper foot. So yours may look differently than mine. They're usually really skinny and small. Mine is wide. But you're just going to carefully try to sew right along this edge here and sew your fabric to the zipper tape. And you're just using a regular width stitch, and don't forget to back stitch on both sides. Alright, so half our zipper is in. Let's do the other half. Pin left back edge of zipper tape, lapping back 1/8 of an inch over back. Turn upper edge of zipper tape over seam allowance, base 3/8 of an inch from pressed edge and 1/4 inch below end of zipper. Stitch as basted using an adjustable zipper foot and squaring stitches across lower end as shown. So now you're going to take the left hand side and we're going to place it over the zipper tape. Now, unlike the right hand side, it's not being placed right along the teeth. It's actually going to lap over the teeth. So that's why this is a lapped zipper. So they want this edge of the zipper tape to go past your folded edge by 1/8 of an inch. So this raw edge here, it's going to get covered by the zipper by 1/8 of an inch. Same thing you need to do, make sure that this head of the zipper is 3/8 of an inch down. And then just like you did before, you're going to tuck this in between the folded edge there so you can have a nice clean edge. So this is going to lap over about 1/8 of an inch, and then you're just going to pin it just like you did before all the way down the zipper. So pretty much the whole thing is going to be covered. Now if you want, you can hand baste it or you can machine baste it, but you're just going to baste it all along down the whole side of it, and then 1/4 of an inch from the bottom of the zipper. So you can kind of feel where the end of the zipper is, and you want to go 1/4 of an inch. Now down the side, they want you to baste 3/8 of an inch from the folded edge of the left hand side. So from this, let's line this up. I'd measure out 3/8 of an inch, about right there, and I'm going to baste it. So you just make sure that you don't hit your zipper teeth. So again, you can do that by hand or you can do that by machine. Once you have it basted in, just like we did before with your adjustable zipper foot, you're just going to stitch right along your basting stitch that you just did. Stitch down here, go past the end of the zipper 1/4 of an inch, pivot, and then go across until you hit your seam or just right on the other side. Don't forget to back stitch on both the top and the bottom. And with that, your zipper will be in. Step 18, so hook and eye at neck edge. So now we're looking at the inside of the dress. This is the wrong side of the zipper at the very top, and you can see I already sewed on my hook, so I just need to sew on my eye. You just need to make sure that you don't put it too far back from the edge, because then it's going to be weird when you're trying to hook it. So you want it pretty close to the edge. And it's kind of similar to sewing on a button. You're going to get your needle and thread. I'm going to grab mine right here. And I'm just going to sew some stitches through one hole and then some stitches through the other hole to secure it. So that's all it is for sewing on a hook and eye. It's pretty easy. So I'm coming through the hole, and then I'm going to go a few more times through this one and then do this one and then knot and cut off my threads. Step 19, to ease top of sleeve between notches, stitch along seam line and 1/4 inch inside seam line using a long machine stitch. So now we're going to start working on the sleeves, and this is going to be piece number 5, and you should have 2 of these. So you see up here at the top, this is the cap, the curved part, and we have a double notch on this side and a single notch on this side. So this you can see on my fabric piece. And now we're going to be prepping, putting the sleeve into the armhole. So to do that, we need to ease the top. And to ease the top, between your double notch and your single notch, you're going to do a basting stitch. So you can start it right about here, and you're doing it at your seam line, which is 5/8 of an inch. So you don't have to do a back stitch. Definitely don't do a back stitch, because we're definitely going to be pulling these threads in order to gather them. So you're going to stitch 5/8 of an inch out from one notch to the other notch. And then from your stitch line, you're going to go in 1/4 of an inch and you're going to do another basting stitch between the two notches again. So between these two notches, you're going to have 2 sets of basting stitch, one at 5/8 of an inch and one 1/4 inch from that seam line going towards the edge. So once you're done with that, we can move on to the next step. Step 20, to make darts and sleeve with right sides together, fold the fabric through the center of the dart, bringing the broken lines and small dots together. On inside, place pins at right angles to broken lines. Stitch the dart from the wide end to point. So it's just like we did before. We're creating darts again for both our sleeves, and this is the side of my sleeve pattern, and you can see there's 3 darts, and each of these are going to go in the sleeve. So you should have transferred this over to, you can make your markings on the wrong side of the fabric, because when we create the darts, it's always on the wrong side. So again, you just have to do your size. So I would just do size 14 for each of these. And then just as you did before, you have your point. You're going to fold along each side of the dart. You're going to pin it, and then you're going to stitch on the dotted line to the point. And we do a back stitch here at the end, but not at the point. You just run the fabric right off, or the needle right off the fabric, and then you hand tie the knot. So if I was to flip this up, you can see here are my darts already completed, and I've already tied them off on the end. And then afterwards, I press my darts down towards the bottom of the sleeve. Let's take care of the first part of step 21 first. Stitch underarm seam. So again, here is the cap of the sleeve, here's the bottom of the sleeve, and these are the 2 sides. So all you're going to do, I have the sleeve right side facing up. I'm going to bring one side to the other side. So I'm folding the sleeve in half. I'm going to pin this edge, making sure that your notches match and your ends match, and then you're just going to do a 5/8 inch seam allowance. The next part of step 21 says, press up hem. To edge finish the raw edge, stitch under 1/4 inch zigzag or overlock serge. Slip stitch hem in place. So all they want you to do is, we're now going to hem the bottom of our sleeve. You see I pressed my seam open from the underarm seam that we just did. So to know how much that you need to hem it up, we have to refer back to our pattern piece. And if we look at the bottom here, you'll see 1¼ inch hem allowed. So I'm going to grab my pins and my sewing gauge, and I'm going to put my sewing gauge at 1¼ And all I'm going to do is turn this up all the way around the sleeve 1¼ inches. Like this. And just measure it with my sewing gauge. And if it's 1¼ go ahead, put a pin, and I'm going to do this all the way around. If you can, it's a good idea to press it so we have a nice crisp edge here at the bottom. Then this raw edge on top, we don't want this to show because now it's ugly. So what they want you to do is edge finish it. So they're giving you an option. You know, you can serge the top, you can do a zigzag stitch, or you can do the other way, which is from the raw edge, you're just going to stitch 1/4 inch. So you would, again, you would unfold this. You're not stitching anything down. It's just a single layer, stitching 1/4 inch, and then you're going to refold it. That's why it's kind of nice that you press it. So you could just fold it up on that crease again. And the raw edge, you're just going to fold over so that your stitch line is right on the crease, and then you're going to go ahead and pin that back down. So once you have the fold here and the fold here on top, everything's pinned together, then we're going to slip stitch our hem into place, and we'll show you how to do that after everything is pinned. To slip stitch the hem, you're definitely going to be doing hand sewing, so definitely get your needle and your thread ready. And what we're going to do is look at the inside of the sleeve. So here is my hem that I just pressed up, and then I pressed under 1/4 inch for the edge finish up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start where I have my underarm seam, and I'm going to go between the 2 layers, so between my seam allowance and the main fabric. And I'm doing that because I want to hide my knot, and I'm coming up just right above my fold of my hem. Then I'm going to grab a little bit of the folded edge of my hem, and then I'm going to grab a little bit of right above the hem, so my dress. And it's easier when you're doing it on the seam allowance because you can just go through the seam allowance instead of the right side of your fabric, so you could do a little bit of a bigger stitch. But when you do it past the seam allowance, so when I'm actually grabbing a little bit of this dress here, I want to make sure that I don't make my stitch too big because we don't want it so noticeable on the right side of the sleeve. You want your stitches to be small and delicate. So here I am on the folded edge, and now I'm going to grab a little bit of the dress or of the sleeve from above the hem, and then I'm going to go back and grab a little bit of the folded edge of my sleeve, of my hem. And so I'm just going back and forth between the two sides. So from the fold of your hem to right above it on the actual sleeve part. Grab the sleeve, and then now I'm going to grab a little bit of the hem. And so you're going to do this all the way around to hem up both of your sleeves. Step 22, turn sleeve right side out. Hold garment wrong side out with armhole toward you. With right sides together, pin sleeve to armhole edge with center dot at shoulder seam, matching small dots. Pull up, ease stitches to fit. To distribute fullness evenly, slide fabric along bobbin threads. Baste, stitch, stitch again 1/8 of an inch from first stitching. Trim seam below notches close to stitching. Press only the seam allowance. So what we're going to do is we're going to now put our sleeves onto our dress. So you have your armholes. Here's one of my armhole right here. And you'll notice each armhole is different. You'll see on this side, the dress is wrong side out, by the way. I have my double notch over here, my single notch on this side. On the other side of my sleeve, it's flipped. Single notches on this side and double notches on this side. That's how you know that you're putting the right sleeve in the correct armhole, because that's what's going to line up. So with my dress wrong side out, I'm going to take one of my sleeves, which is right side out, and I'm going to stick it in the armhole. So now essentially they're going to be right sides together. So here's the top, my shoulder seam, and it's going to go to the right side of my sleeve. So that's why you do it the way you do it. So first though, we're going to start with the underarm seam of the sleeve. So this is the seam we put into our sleeve, and this is going to match our side seam of our dress. So let's just move this up a little bit. Grab my pins. And now if I'm to look at my sleeve, let's see, I have a double notch on this side, and it matches the double notch on my dress. So again, that's how you know that the right sleeve is in the right armhole. So I go ahead and pin this, and then I match up the single notch of the sleeve with the single notch of the dress. Now remember, at the top of the sleeve cap there were 3 dots that were from your pattern. So mine are really hard to see. Let me see, I have one right here, and then I have one right here, and then I have one right in the middle. So the middle dot gets matched to your shoulder seam. So I'm going to pin that. Then you should have a dot on either side of the dress. So this dot over here matches the second dot over here, and then I have another dot over here, and that matches the dot of the sleeve. Now what you'll have to do is, the reason why we did these basting stitches, is you will have to pull your threads, and you're just pulling it on one side. Let me take out this pin. It's a little bit easier if it's not pinned up. You're just going to pull it, and it starts to gather, but you're going to distribute this gathering because we don't want to create any ruffles or places where it's going to look like there's a big wrinkle there. And you just kind of distribute it so it just kind of waves. And so that's how you get the sleeve to actually fit into the armhole, because the sleeve always has a little bit more material to fit the armhole. So you just do that to gather it. And then you're just going to pin all the way around so the sleeve is fully pinned to your armhole. You're going to stitch your 5/8 inch seam allowance. Then you're going to come in 1/8 of an inch from that stitch and you're going to stitch again. So there's going to be 2 stitches, one at 5/8, one at 1/2 inch. Then what you're going to do is between your 2 notches down here, so the double notch and the single notch, you can go ahead and just trim your seam allowance. Don't cut into your stitches, you're just going to trim it down a little bit so we don't have all this fabric that's going to be right in your armpit. Then what you can do is you just press your seam allowance. You're not pressing the sleeve or anything, just the seam allowance part just to make it look all nice and neat on the inside. And you do that for both sleeves, and your sleeves are then in your dress. Step 23, mark length. Press up hem along marking, mark depth of hem, trim evenly. To edge finish the raw edge, stitch under 1/4 inch, zigzag or overlock serge, slip stitch hem in place. So this is basically the same thing that we've already done for the bottom of the sleeve when we hemmed it up. So we're getting close to the end now. So now we're going to do the last big thing, and that's going to be the hem. So at this point, what you should do, the fun part, take your dress, try it on, see what length that you would like it to be. So once you have it, like if you want to hem it up 1 inch, then write that down so you know how much you need to hem it up. So you're going to go around your dress and you're going to press up whatever you're going to hem. And you have to be careful because sometimes you need to hem it up a little bit less in the back than in the front because maybe you're a little bit bigger in the back. That's fine. You just want it to all be even. So if you need to do a different length for the back than the front, it's fine. Once you have it, you're going to press up whatever that is, and then you're going to trim it so everything looks even. So if you go up 2 inches in the front and 1 inch in the back, then in the front maybe trim off 1 inch so it all looks the same. Then just like we did for the sleeve, you're going to do the edge finish. So you can go ahead, stitch 1/4 inch away from the raw edge all the way around, and that way you know you can just fold under that 1/4 inch so the stitching is right on the edge. Pin it back to your original place where you marked your hem, and then just like we did with the sleeve, you're going to do that hand sewing, the slip stitch, and you're going to hand sew the hem into place. All right, for those of you doing view B, you are done. But those of us doing view A, we have one last thing to do, and that's step 24. On outside, sew 6 buttons along center front, placing first button approximately 5/8 of an inch below neck edge and spacing the remaining buttons 3/4 inch apart. So you should have 6 buttons that are 5/8 of an inch. That's the size of them. And what you're going to do is, we'll start with one button. You're going to sew on the button 5/8 of an inch down from the middle of your neck edge. And you're going to do it right in the center of that front bodice. So about right there. And then you're going to get your next button and you're going to place it about 3/4 inch away from the front button. And then 3/4 inch away will go the next button. So it might be easier just to get your ruler, and with your fabric marker you can just make your dots. So that way you don't have to keep figuring it out. You can just sew one button after another. And for this one, you can use a flat button if you want. I'm using the shank button, and this is the button that's usually kind of flat or round on top, and then it has the hole in the back, which is part of the shank. So I'm going to show you how to sew that on. These are kind of small, so we're just going to get a little closer, and I'm actually going to use a different button that's bigger and different fabric, so it'll be a lot easier to see how to sew it on. But then after that, once your buttons are sewn on, you can enjoy your dress. Alright, so I have my sample shank button here on my bright blue fabric, and I have bright red thread. This is something that we're going to hand sew. So you can see the shank down here, and here's the hole and everything like that. So I'm just going to come up from underneath because I want my knot to be on the wrong side of the fabric, on one side of the shank near the hole, right where I want to place my button. Okay, and then you just go through the hole to the other side, and you go back down into the fabric close to the shank. So I'm just going to move this so I don't stab myself in the thumb. I'm going to pull it up, tighten that up, and then you're just going to repeat the process. And I usually like to do it about 7 or 8 times to make sure that it's secure. So same thing, come up from underneath on one side, go through the hole, and then go down on the other side in the fabric. So you're back to the back. And after, we'll just pretend like I've done this about 10 times. I'll show you how to finish it off. So what you're going to do is you don't just tie a knot in the back and then cut it like you would the flat button. This one's a little bit different. So one last time, come up on one side for the last time. And you can see my 2 threads right here. You're going to come up behind the threads on the shank. Bring your thread in there. I'll do it one more time. Behind the threads. And when you do this, you'll see that you create a loop with your thread. There's a loop. So all I'm going to do is just go through the loop to create a knot. And then I'm going to do it again. I usually like doing it about 3 times because I like to make sure that my knot's going to stick. And then I go through the loop one more time. Whoops, there we go. And then I'm going to do it one more time. But since you already know how to do it, so the next step would be you're going to go through your shank. And for this one, I would turn it around so I can see the other side. And you can see my threads over there. And then I would just do the same thing. Just take your needle, go through the threads that you stitched previously, create a loop, go through the loop, create a knot, and then you do that 3 more times. And then once you have 3 knots on each side, you can go ahead and cut it off and then move on to your next button. After the buttons are attached, the only thing left to do is to remove any fabric markers you still have on your dress and to remove any basting stitches that you see. This has been Simplicity Pattern 1777. Be sure to check out our other pattern tutorials as well, and we hope you enjoy your new dress. Make sure to check out our other videos and visit ProfessorPincushion.com to view our complete library with well over 100 sewing video tutorials. New tutorials are released regularly, so make sure to subscribe to be notified of the next release. Thanks for watching!